Okay, so right now I am doing an Ask Me Anything session on Reddit, and that session is about my online psychoanalysis business, and it is therefore titled, appropriately enough, I am an online psychoanalyst. Ask me anything about online psychoanalysis. Okay, so I'm going to read the questions I've received along with my answers to them. The first one is from Graham. Can you psychoanalyze someone without them answering specific questions? Let's say we have an older gentleman in a powerful public position that seems to have people divided to either hate or love him. He seems to have pretty severe narcissism and a degree of megalomania. He has a weird propensity for being attracted to women that look like his daughter. He also appears to have a streak for pathological lying. Can you analyze him, or do we need to get him to take the test? Or do we need to get or do we need to get him to take the test? Presumably, he's referring to the psychopathy test or some such. Anyway, here's my answer. Such a person is not likely to submit to analysis, and if he does undergo it, it is probably with the intention of manipulating the analyst and or acquiring psychoanalytic acumen as a way of honing his game. But me personally, yes, I could do it. I think there's still hope for this chap. He hasn't quite crossed that line. And then I wrote, whoever this not so hypothetical person is, I would love to meet him. The next question is from Savannah. What was the worst case you ever had? Here's my answer. In order to psychoanalyze someone, you have to get along with them, and you have to have at least a minimum of respect for them. If these conditions are not met, the analysis doesn't last long enough for the person to even become irritating to you. Also, people who voluntarily submit to analysis are people who want to learn about themselves, and generally, therefore, are people of substance. The next question is from Tickle My Neutrino. Do you think that there are still more effective psychological techniques and methods to be discovered that could be used in online psychoanalysis, or would you say that most of it has been figured out and the effectiveness of psychoanalysis as a tool cannot be improved much further than where it is today? And here's my response. I should point out that it's not all that responsive a response. I slightly misunderstood the question, but here it is. The term psychoanalysis doesn't refer to a particular set of methods. It refers to the practice of trying to improve people by critically listening to them. So yes, any analyst worth his salt will always be updating his methods and his beliefs, but this by itself won't mean that psychoanalysis will be displaced. It will mean only that what is involved in understanding and helping people will change. I should point out that I believe that psychoanalysis stands to make many discoveries. In other words, I believe that there are many discoveries and developments and improvements that it should make, and I believe that there are at least a few that it will make. The main one, I believe, is that psychoanalysis as it currently exists, and this is true of all forms of therapy, but psychoanalysis certainly is much too slow. That's one problem. Another problem, and I guess it's of equal importance, but another problem is that there are there are too few well-defined benchmarks of therapeutic success. And this is a major problem with all forms of psychotherapy. Um, I mean, therapists are reluctant to evaluate their own success as therapists with respect to well-defined criteria of success. And up to a point, that's kind of understandable. You don't you don't want to impose your own preconceptions as to what success is on your patients, but there have to be some tangible benchmarks that patients meet, and there is a paucity of such benchmarks right now as analysis and psychotherapy in general in practice. And that's one respect in which the Freud Institute does not fall short. We're all about doing analysis in a timely fashion, okay, doing it quickly and doing it in a very reality oriented, practical way. I mean, we want you to make more money, uh, date more often, have professional success. So those are the benchmarks in terms of which we measure the efficacy of analysis. And those are not just proposed benchmarks; we're actually using them, and our methods are working relative to those benchmarks. Okay. The next question is from Who is Fourth Wall? What are the challenges of doing your job since you are not doing it in person? As in, you are not doing it right in front of the person so that you can observe them physically rather than through video. Here's my response. Believe it or not, video-based psychoanalysis works surprisingly well. I myself did not know whether it would work, and I only recently made the transition from in-person to video, but it really works. In fact, it eliminates some of the tensions that can potentially weigh down or at least complicate in-person analysis. And then Who is Fourth Wall responded, I see. Could this be due to the patient, not sure what the correct term is, being in their own comfort space, such as their homes? I respond as follows. Quite possibly. I think a lot of it is that people, especially men, might feel uncomfortable in the presence of a 6'2" man, namely me. A lot of the way analysts and therapists behave has to do with not making the patient feel threatened, which leads to therapists and analysts dulling themselves down excessively, which limits what they can do therapeutically. But online, none of this matters. And then who is the fourth wall responded, the dulling part is interesting. And I responded to that. A lot of in-person therapy has to do with the therapists hedging against criminal and civil liability, against his being the target of false accusations, mainly of sexual harassment. This does not often occur, but if it occurs even once, the therapist has to have very good insurance and a lot of lawyer money, all of which is priced into the therapy. But none of this is a factor in online psychoanalysis. Plus, scheduling is a lot easier since people don't have to travel anywhere, so it all works out better. And then who was the fourth wall responded, that makes sense. Do you have to keep a record of each session? How about in-person therapy? Are there any standards of practices which require video recordings? Under what circumstances would necessitate reporting patients to the authorities aside from a threat to do harm towards you or towards others? And here is my answer. I don't videotape sessions. There are no circumstances that require me to go to the authorities. The client is not likely to threaten me, especially since I'm in most cases thousands of miles away. I know that who is fourth wall was asking about in-person analysis, but I just decided to focus on what I'm actually doing. Also, I'm not a prison psychologist. I'm not dealing with criminals. I'm dealing with people who are trying to get better. I don't report crimes that are reported to me ever. Not my job. The opposite of my job, actually. And I should point out that this whole kind of scenario of the analysand who tells the therapist that he just killed somebody or that he's about to kill somebody, it may happen, but it's very unusual. Okay, I mean, you are a lot of soft crimes are reported to you, but they're, yeah, but the operative word is soft. Okay, I mean, murderers don't usually. I mean, there are exceptions to this, but murderers are usually not all that drawn to psychoanalysis. Okay, then. Okay, so who was the fourth wall then said, okay, thanks a bunch. All right. Besterman asks, where did you study? And I responded, UCLA for my BA, UCSB, that's the University of California at Santa Barbara, for my PhD, and the Richmond Psychoanalytic Institute. And then Immortal Azrael asks, what's wrong with me? And I wrote, I'd love to tell you and give him a link to the appointment page on my website. The next question is pretty interesting. It's from Tickle My Neutrino, from whom we've already heard. Is there any research looking at changes in biometrics, i.e. heart rate variability, EEG, MRI, neuroplasticity, etc., as clients go from pathological to healthy? And here's my answer. That's a very good question, by the way. I personally am very interested in brain scans. They tell us a lot about a person's condition, and repeated use of them could tell us a lot about changes, including improvements in a person's condition. But they are not used in therapy as therapy is currently practiced. And this, I believe, and the reason for this, I believe, is that most therapy is simply not very effective, and therapists don't want to confront that fact. But what I want to do is have before and after scans of my patients and then use those to prove the legitimacy of my business and to market my business. And again, I believe very strongly in brain scans. I mean, I believe very strongly that the mental has to be understood in its own terms, but it is a fact that people with different conditions have different brain scans. I mean, even conditions that are normal conditions like depression have corresponded distinctive brain scans. And the brain scan of a depressed person looks very different from the brain scan of a non-depressed person. And the brain scan of a psychopath looks very different, extremely different from the brain scan of a non-psychopath. The brain scan of a schizophrenic looks utterly different from that of a normal person. The brain scan of an OCD person looks very different from that of a normal person. I'd like to actually very instantly point out one thing about the OCD brain scans, which is that they're unusual among brain scans in that they're the only brain scans of people with pathological conditions that show an excess, that both show an excess of activity and also show organized activity. Okay, so if you look at the brain scans of alcoholics, of depressed people, of psychopaths, they're all sort of blacked out or grayed out. Now, the schizophrenic's brain scan does show a lot of activity, but the brain scan is totally chaotic. It's asymmetrical and disorganized. The OCD brain scan is very symmetrical and very organized. It is very, very, very highly lit up. And I'm not saying that OCD is not a pathology. It definitely is, but it's clearly, the Rolls Royce of pathologies in some respects. Okay. So the next question is from Brightgood. You seem to be very tolerant and patient with people and in growing your business. How does one enhance those qualities, namely tolerance and patience, in oneself? Here's my response. Thank you for the affirmation, my friend, and I did mean that. It was a very kind and intelligent question. I am very ambitious, and I am also extremely interested in people. Because I am ambitious, I'm willing to put up with difficulties caused by situations, hence my patience, and because I am interested in people, I'm willing to put up with difficulties caused by people, hence my tolerance. Okay, and then Agaro1086 asks, can you psychoanalyze someone through Snapchat screenshots? And here's my response. Why don't we find out? Go ahead and post them or direct me to the URL. And unfortunately, he did not post them. Okay. And then the last question is from Fatcock. That's spelled Phatkok, so that's pretty darn funny. Okay, he asks, or what, well, it's probably a he. Okay, is it true that many people who work in the psychology field are total? Is it true that many people who work in the psychology field are total butt bags? Every shrink I've ever sat down with seems crazier than me. If true, why is it so? Here's my answer. The answer to that is yes, and the reason for that is that when people go into psychology is usually, though not always, because they themselves have psychological deficits. Okay, so that is my Reddit Ask Me Anything session about online psychoanalysis, and I do encourage you to go ahead and go to my website, or one of my websites, and that is www.freudinstitute.com. All right, take care. See you soon.